Armenia's Prime Minister denounced an attempted military coup after the military's general staff demanded his resignation. The Supreme Court of Justice of Colombia declared inadmissible the charges filed against President Ivan Duque regarding the presence of U.S. troops in the country. And Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, announced this Thursday that the country has surpassed 25,000 COVID-19 vaccinations, representing 12.5% of the adult population. Hello and welcome to teleSUR English. I am Estefania Bravo from the headquarters of Quito in Ecuador. This is from the south. This Thursday, Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan denounced an attempted military coup after the military's general staff demanded his resignation. The Chief of General Staff of the Armenian Army, along with other senior commanders, released a statement calling for Pashinyan to step down. The Prime Minister described the military's call as a coup attempt and urged his supporters to take to the streets to resist. Pashinyan later announced the dismissal of the Chief of General Staff and joined his supporters marching through the streets of the capital, Yerevan. The unrest follows the end of a military conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan last fall, widely seen as a victory for the latter. During the 6-week conflict, which ended with a Russian-brokered truce, Azerbaijan took control of several strategic cities and nearly 300 settlements and villages.
Yesterday and today, I made a decision to dismiss the first Deputy Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces, Tiran Kachaturian, and the Chief of the General Staff. I have already signed all the papers, followed by a statement from the General Staff in which the military demanded my resignation. What is happening now, this statement from the General Staff, I consider it an attempt at a military coup. You know that I took all responsibility for what happened and tried to do everything to answer all the questions myself. Now we have to come to a stage where we cannot avoid questions towards some of our high-ranking military personnel.
And during a rally in the country's capital, the Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan called on the army to fulfill its duty and obey the people and the elected officials.
I am ordering all generals, officers, and soldiers do your job of protecting the country's borders. This is my order and no one can breach it. Some people want to drag the army into unconstitutional processes. This is an attempted coup, but the people will not allow a military coup in Armenia. The army can take part in political processes. It must obey the people and the elected authorities.
In the armed forces and called on them to leave. The Prime Minister further added that it was up to the people to decide if he should step down. The Prime Minister warned his opponents that they might face arrest if they crossed any lines from statements to action. Pashinyan also rejected the idea of early parliamentary elections. In a statement, the Armenian Defense Ministry said on Thursday that any attempt to get armed forces involved in political activity were unacceptable. And Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Thursday Russia follows the recent developments in Armenia with concern, calling both sides to calm down and show restraint. Peskov added that with what is happening in Armenia's internal affair, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Armenian counterpart Ara Aivasyan held a phone conversation on the current developments, and Lavrov sparks hope for a peaceful settlement of the political crisis. In Turkey, Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said the nation strongly condemns the coup attempt in Armenia.
We are absolutely against coups or coup attempts, wherever they are in the world. Therefore, we strongly condemn this coup attempt in Armenia. Of course, in democracies, citizens and people can criticize the government and even demand their resignation. These are natural things, but it is unacceptable for soldiers to call for an elected government to resign, let alone call for a coup.
And supporters of Armenia's opposition took to the streets in the country's capital. Later, Armenian warplanes flew over the capital of Yerevan during rallies of supporters and opponents of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. The military aircraft flew over Liberty Square, and the opposition supporters who gathered there welcomed this move. The Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has denied rumors that he was preparing to flee the country. Several reports say supporters of Pashinyan and the opposition engaged in sporadic scuffles on the streets of Yerevan. Moving on, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Xiao Lijian said on Thursday that the nation strongly opposes groundless accusations and stigmatization of China's normal economic and trade practices.
The essence of China-US economic and trade cooperation is mutual benefit and win-win results. As for some problems in the economic and trade ties of the two countries, the two sides should properly solve them in the spirit of mutual respect and equal consultation. We firmly oppose any groundless accusation or even stigmatization of China's normal economic and trade practices.
This Thursday, European Union leaders met virtually to study jab rollout vaccine certificates and facing demands from some capitals for a continent-wide vaccine support. European Union leaders are under pressure to keep up Europe's coronavirus vaccine. Most of the 27 nations are experiencing a second wave of cases or a third wave for some. Several EU officials and diplomats argued that while they support a verifiable vaccination registry, it is too early to think about using them to facilitate travel. A collapsed illegal gold mine in Indonesia's Sulawesi Island buried dozens of people as grueling search and rescue efforts retrieved 3 bodies of female miners and saved 15 people from the debris, officials said on Thursday. Survivors estimated that about 23 people were still trapped in the rubble of the mining pit in Parigi Montong district of central Sulawesi province. Makeshift wooden structures in the mine collapsed late on Wednesday due to unstable soil, burying people in the mine pit. And Andreas Hendrik Johannes, who heads local search and rescue agency. He said police, emergency personnel, military, and volunteers were all taking part in the rescue effort, but the remote local complicated the operation. In Haiti, authorities suggested changing the date of the constitutional referendum to June after being scheduled for April 25th. The spokesman of the Prime Minister in charge of the electoral issues, Matthias Pierre, reported that the proposal to delay the consultation for a new constitution is due to technical requirements imposed by the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. In an agreement with the multilateral organization, the spokesman hopes the measure will help to ensure peaceful elections and committed to provide the required materials. In Ecuador, the authorities were able to control new riots in Latacunga and Guayaquil on Wednesday night. They have announced the progressive restoration of order in prisons after acts of violence. The general commander of the police, Patricio Carrillo, announced that uniformed personnel regained control of the detention facility Guayas number 4 in Guayaquil after a report of more violent fighting in the building. The police authority also reported that at Sierra Norte Cotopaxi Social Rehabilitation Center in Latacunga, a riot was also registered on Wednesday night and had been controlled. The National Service of Community Centers for Adults pointed out that during the riot in Latacunga, there were no reported deaths or injuries among inmates and that the police took control of the prison center. And late Wednesday, authorities stopped the prison break of 14 inmates in Guayaquil in the middle of the prison crisis. On Tuesday, the prison number 4 of Guayaquil was the scene of the death of 31 people in a wave of riots and clashes in the country, in which at least 79 people died and 20 were injured. State agencies are investigating these events that seem to respond to the rivalry between criminal gangs that are disputing the country's criminal map and that could also be involved to drug trafficking. Moving on, in Mexico, the Chamber of Deputies approved the reform to the electricity industry law presented by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador with the objective, according to the president, of recovering state control over this strategic sector. The details.
The purpose of the reform to the electricity industry law, sent to Parliament on February 1st by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and which has already been endorsed by the Chamber of Deputies, is to strengthen the Federal Electricity Commission.
They were deliberately destroying the industry to sell off energy market to private, national, and especially foreign companies. I know that this does not coincide with the opinion of those who supported the neoliberal privatization policies for 36 years.
The idea is to reverse the constitutional amendments endorsed during previous governments, which allowed the transfer of 50% of responsibility for electricity generation in the country to private capital.
Here, besides selling energy at market prices, it is necessary to subsidize. To begin with, they pay nothing for the use of electricity grid.
During the parliamentary debate, Labour Party lawmaker Gerardo Fernández Noroña recalled the promises made by former presidents Felipe Calderón and Enrique Peña Nieto to promote the energy reform that in 2013 allowed for the privatization of the sector. If we carry out this reform, the price of electricity and gas will go down.
Our colleague and president said in Chiapas, "I did not come to steal from you. I came to give you back everything." And that is what we are doing with the preferential initiative, recovering the Federal Electricity Commission for the people, serving the people and honoring our word.
The opposition National Action Party assured that it will file legal remedies to prevent an increase in the cost of services to consumers.
This message is for the law market of the left and for the subjects of the President of the Republic. Make no mistake, the preferential initiative is inconsistent with the constitutional framework that regulates the electricity sector.
However, during the last two administrations of the neoliberal period, electricity rates increased. The same occurred in terms of Mexico's dependency on the United States for up to 60% of the natural gas used for electricity generation. The promoters of the reform, which will now have to pass through the Senate, say it is about recovering national production and with it, sovereignty in the energy sector.
The people of Guatemala commemorated the National Day for the Dignification of Victims of the Internal Armed Conflict this Thursday. On this occasion, the families of the victims of the conflict gathered to demand justice. A Mayan ceremony was held at the National Palace of Culture to pay tribute to those killed, followed by a march to the congressional headquarters. According to the report by the Commission for Historical Clarification presented in February 1999, 93% of the massacres that took place in the country during the internal conflict were executed by the army, while the rest were attributed to guerrilla forces and unidentified armed groups. A young man lost his left eye in the Colombian capital, Bogotá, this Wednesday in the midst of protests against police brutality. The mobilization started in front of the Pedagogical University to protest against police brutality and impunity for crimes committed by officers of the MOBA Anti-Disturbances Squadron. In the midst of the police repression of demonstrators, Gareth Estela Forero suffered an injury that led to the loss of his left eye. The district government secretary office assured that it will provide legal and psychological support to the young man. Meanwhile, alternative media and social movements present during the repression stressed that the squadron intentionally fired directly into the faces of the protesters. And the Supreme Court of Justice of Colombia declared inadmissible the charges filed against President Ivan Duque for the presence of U.S. troops in the country. This decision was announced by the Civil Chamber of the Supreme Court. The initiative was previously rejected by the Higher Court of Cundinamarca in December of 2020. The charges filed by an individual citizen stated that President Ivan Duque violated the right for peace in the country and South America by allowing the entry of U.S. troops to the national territory. The document also argued that the foreign military presence sought to provoke instability in neighboring Venezuela and the rest of the region. On Thursday, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, announced that the country had surpassed 25,000 COVID-19 vaccinations, totaling 12.5% of Barbados' adult population.
Mark the fact that last night in the country we reached 25,000 vaccinations. We surpassed it. And it is a moment that we are grateful for, and I want to thank those Barbadians who have come forward over the course of less than 2 weeks, that I hope I can address the country next week with some better news. But this is a moment where more and more Barbadians are understanding that if we want to turn the corner, if we want, like the rest of the world, we see what is happening in Israel, we see what is happening in the UAE, we see what is happening even in the United Kingdom. If we want to turn the corner on this dreaded pandemic, then we ourselves need to strengthen ourselves. And we also need to step up to the plate.
Cuba has started large-scale production of its COVID-19 vaccine candidate known as Abdallah. The directors of the laboratory responsible for producing the vaccine candidate assured there exists the capability to produce 100,000 doses per day. The move comes ahead of the start of phase 3 clinical trials next week. Abdallah reached this phase after meeting the regulatory requirements of the Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology and the ICA laboratory. Scientists working on the development of Abdallah stated that they have already proved its safety and its efficiency. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez took to Twitter to reiterate calls for the fair distribution of COVID-19 vaccines around the world. The minister noted that while 10 developed countries hoard 3/4 of available COVID-19 vaccines, many developing nations will not have access to them until late 2022. He stressed that the world needs equitable and caring distribution of vaccines to protect the poor and the most vulnerable. Bolivia's Health and Sports Ministry said that mass vaccination of the population began this Thursday with 500,000 Chinese Sinopharm vaccines. Authorities ratified that the process is to begin in Santa Cruz. The vaccine will be administered to more than 169,000 healthcare workers, meaning that both the public and the private sectors will be completely covered. More than 70,000 elderly people with underlying conditions will also be vaccinated. Bolivia plans to receive 15 million vaccine doses, including 1.7 million doses of Russia's Sputnik V, which will arrive at the end of March. Bolivia will also receive a number of COVID-19 vaccines from COVAX, whose arrival candidate will depend on the World Health Organization and its regional office. Colombia began vaccinating adults over the age of 80 against COVID-19 with the Chinese Sinovac vaccine at a care home in Cibate, south of the capital, Bogotá. All this is a speculation of Ivan Duque's government.
I recommend that all staff get vaccinated. It doesn't hurt, nothing will happen to them, because I feel very good.
It is a ray of hope. We have been confined for a year without them being able to go out to their recreation spaces, to their medical appointments, and their relatives were not able to visit them either. It is a ray of hope to get back in touch with the outside world in some way.
People we vaccinate today are over 80 years old. They are people who live in this residence permanently, and they are all, as I said, older adults.
Colombia began vaccinating residents of the city of Leticia in the Amazon region of the country's border with Peru and Brazil this Thursday with the aim of immunizing the population and preventing the spread of the P1 strain of COVID-19 from Brazil. Leticia is the area most affected by the coronavirus in the Amazon region, but the Colombian government of Ivan Duque had failed to include it in previous vaccination plans.
I'm happy to be the first to get vaccinated here in the Amazon department. I invite all my compatriots to come and get vaccinated.
I feel calm, with great hope, with an expectation that this improves, that this situation changes, that we can have a normal life again.
Receiving the vaccine means very big things, because honestly, I was very sad without having the vaccine, because the disease was making the Amazon go through difficult times.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, don't forget to follow us on our social media accounts. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram as well. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. See you next time.